networking guru. Everybody who knows you and knows your work at Fraser Net knows that you are the person that talks and convenes similar conversations to talk about how it is that on the economic front, certainly on the entrepreneur front, we have to do better by ourselves, but also demand, again, that there's a role for government to play. And I want to be very clear. This is not, a conversation just about what they ought to do. We understand that there's a role we have to have. Mr. Farrakhan mentioned that to us. We got to, and Reverend Sharpton mentioned that. We got to have contact with ourselves. We got that. But in terms of this covenant, in terms of this contract, talk to me about economics and what your sense is of what we ought to be discussing in the days and weeks ahead about what the demand will be on the economic front.
First, let me just address a very simple issue and get some clarity around leadership, because I believe we're talking about personal leadership around these issues. So let us define and be real clear what leadership is as it relates to economics and all the other issues we're going to be discussing on this panel. First, to be a leader is to be awake and alert and to be dissatisfied at all times. You see, we have come a long way, but we have much further to go. So I'm not happy. I hope that you're not happy.
That's right.
But I am motivated by a positive anger directed towards positive change. Leadership is action, not position. It is not some appointment that you get. I see your mouth running, but what are you doing? Okay? So we have to focus on the deeds, on the action that we are taking individually in respects to our own homes and our own communities. Leadership is influence. Who are we influencing? We are influencing our children. And if our children cannot see the future, they will not pay the price, right? We are all replaceable by our children. A leader is one who has found their voice and is engaged in helping others to find their voice. So this is all about what each of us are doing individually in our own personal lives. Now, as it relates to economics, it is real clear. It is very simple. Success runs in our race, make no mistake about that. We're a $723 billion annual economy. If we were a nation, we would be the 11th richest nation in the entire world, okay? But we know that we have taken the art of consumption to a whole new level. We know that less than 5% of our economy is recycled back in our community, all right? So we have to fix that. But we have a huge economic base to work from.
Exactly.
Secondly,
Go ahead, brother.
Secondly, black folk from just my generation alone, and I'm 60 years old, I know I look 35 or 40, but I'm actually 60. And for those of you that were not entirely sure, yes, I am black. Make no mistake about it. There's a sister going over there. Black folks from just my generation
George,
alone.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That was very important for us to know.
Black folks from just my generation alone have amassed over 500 billion hours of formal education and professional training from just one generation alone. If you wanted to convert that into dollars at just $10 an hour and try to get a decent education and professional training for $10 an hour, that means the collective intellectual capital base from one generation alone is worth in excess of $5 trillion. And by the way, 60% of the black workforce in this country, 9 million of us, are in executive, managerial, supervisory, professional specialty, vocational, technical, administrative, sales, and business ownership positions. Now, that is an army of potential role models and mentors to help those who are stuck in the cycle of poverty. In fact, there is no army in the entire world larger than the army of black folk in this country. I've traveled all over the world, as many of you have traveled all over the world. I've been to South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, all over the Caribbean, and all over this country, speaking 120 times a year for the past 20 years. And I can tell you that there are no black people in the entire world doing better than we are. In fact, if the truth be known, we are the beacon of hope for every single person of African descent in the entire world. And because we are morally grounded and spiritually rooted people, we also know that to whom much is given, much is required. Okay? So we have everything we need to succeed. Now, we need a new unifying purpose. We need a third and final moral imperative and moral assignment. I said third. The first two, in case you forgot, was freedom, a 250-year fight for freedom, where 10 generations of our ancestors fought and died for our freedom. They chartered a good and righteous course, stayed that course, and we were freed in 1864, and we don't have to spend 1 minute of our lives fighting for our freedom. That was the first moral imperative and moral assignment from my perspective. The second was civil rights, voting rights, and public access from 1864 to 1964, 4 generations, 100 years. So we were unified around those ideas. If you were black in America, during those two periods, you were down with the freedom thing, and you were down with the civil rights, voting rights, and public access thing. Okay? If you were black in America. And Harriet Tubman's network of freedom fighters on the Underground Railroad is a legacy that remains with us today. And Dr. King's network of garbage men, black folk, white folk, rich folk, is a network and a legacy that remains with us today. So the third and final moral imperative, the next unifying purpose, has to be this notion, has to be this idea of closing the income and wealth gap between black folk and white folk, economic development and wealth creation. Now, how do we know this? Because in the last 40 years, since civil rights, we have observed something as black people, as the Jews observed being freed from the Pharaoh and have to wander in the desert. We've learned that in a market-based economy, in a democratic capitalistic society, the only color that really matters is green. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's what it is. So until our pile of green is as big and as high and as deep and as wide as any other cultural group's pile of green, we will never be considered an equal at the table of democratic capitalism. A. B, we look at money differently. We look at wealth differently. We know that wealth is not happiness per se. How do we know that? Because we all know people who have money who are not happy. So we sort of internalize, because we're moral and spiritual people, wealth as the next level of freedom because it provides us choices. And you see, God too wants us to have unlimited choices. And then it is the management of our choices that is the essence of living. So we want unlimited choices. You see, unlimited choices. So the next movement must be, the next unifying purpose must be economic development, wealth creation, the closing of the income and wealth gap. And to do that, we must more wisely manage the $753 billion annual economy. And two, we must become an entrepreneurial culture. We must create work and jobs for our people. That's what every culture that has come to this great country has done, has created work and jobs for their people, because that is the only way to raise up the poor. That's what we must do, and we must do that by using networking, strategic alliances, joint ventures, partnerships as our infrastructure to build the kind of partnerships, the kind of love, the collaboration, collectiveness that is necessary. Finally, let me say this real plain, so just so you don't get this confused. God ain't giving us anything else. We have freedom, civil rights, voting rights, and public access, a $723 billion annual economy, $5 trillion of intellectual capital, 9 million of us are doing okay. We ain't getting nothing else. So until we learn how to come together, work with and through each other, because that's the final thing God wants us to learn, until we learn how to connect the dots, leverage our collective resources and intellectual capital, when we learn that, we will be a force to be reckoned with, and don't you believe for 1 minute that others do not understand that. All right.